In this episode of The Effective Executive, you will learn about the Taguchi Loss Function and how to use it both manufacturing and service industry and what makes it different. Hi, I'm Trip Babbitt, and let's talk about the Taguchi Loss Function. And I think the best way to begin this is to contrast in manufacturing the traditional approach to doing manufacturing and measurements in accordance with specification limits, and then look at how the Taguchi Loss Function works. And we'll begin in manufacturing, then we'll go to service industry. So let's bring up this diagram and begin with what manufacturers would use as the lower specification limit. Now, just for use, we'll say the target is a 4-inch round, a metal round, and if it's 3.9 inches, that would be the lower specification limit. It's still good. If it's 4.1 inches, that would be the upper specification limit. That would be good also. But anything below that lower specification limit or above the upper specification limit would either be scrap or rework. And obviously, if it's 3.8 inches, we can't add any more metal to it, so that would be scrap in order to get to our target of 4 inches. And with the upper specification limit, if it was 4.2 inches, then we would have to rework it and make it within the upper specification limit and the lower specification limit. And the thing to realize about this mentality is that there's costs, right? So it costs us money to scrap something as well as money to rework it. And that's where there's loss in manufacturing. Well, Taguchi came along with a totally different mindset and focused on saying, from some of the things he learned from the work of Walter Schuhart and W. Edwards Deming that really took this to Japan, where Taguchi picked it up, was shrinking the variation around the target. So if it's a 4-inch round and it's perfectly 4 inches, then that's great because that's the optimum of where you want to be. Now, the further that you get away from that 4-inch target, then it may be good still, and it may be acceptable if it gets a little further away, but at some point it becomes bad. And bad could be defined, and I guess the best way to explain this, at least that I've found, is if you have some gears, and the gears are right to the optimum. Let's say they're right to the target that you were shooting for the size of these gears. They would fit very tightly, right? And so as they turn, there wouldn't be a lot of play in it. They would be very tight together. But if we had one gear that was, let's say, on the upper side and the other one on the lower side, there's going to be some play. So in other words, there's going to be gaps in between the gears as they turn, and that creates friction, and that friction then creates wear on the gears, and the gears wear out, and then there may be the need for warranty work, or the customer has to go get it repaired, and all of those types of things. So there's economic loss associated with getting away from whatever the optimum is for any particular manufacturing product. And this concept is relatively pretty well known to manufacturers nowadays, although I do run into some manufacturers that still aren't familiar with it, and they're still getting away with it at their cost. Okay, so let's look at the service industry. Now, the best example I think that I can give you is from a traditional upper specification, lower specification type of thinking, is when you call the cable company and they say, hey, we're going to be there between 8, lower specification limit, and 12, upper specification limit. And the mindset, to me, already communicates loss to the customer. I'm not creating value for you because as a customer, you got to take time out of your day to wait for this technician to show up to put in my cable or fix my cable or whatever it might be. And so that 8 to 12 goalpost that you're trying, that the company's trying to hit, I don't know what your experience is, but they may hit it maybe 25 to 50% of the time. They're rarely in the, now sometimes they're better about calling it these days than they used to be. But, even if they call me at 11 o'clock and say, hey, I can't get there until 2, you're like, dude, I've got a life. I've got other things to do. I need to get to work. I told my work that I'd be, back in. I could have worked all morning, So it's that type of loss to the customer. And so that's traditional service industry thinking. Now, if we go to the Taguchi Loss Function, bringing up the diagram again, the best thing that you can do for a customer right off right out of the gate is come up with a time that you're going to show up. And you might negotiate, let's say we're going to be there at 9 o'clock. Now, especially in the States, other than the companies that I've worked with, this doesn't happen very often, if at all. And negotiating a time to be there at 9, existing systems will say, oh, well, we could never do that. Well, you can, and it has been done. But come up with a time that you're going to negotiate with the customer. You're going to say, hey, we're going to put in your cable at 9 a.m. And I'll tell you, it creates value for the customer because now they know that I don't have to be there all frickin' day waiting for the technician between 8 and 12 and then they miss the target and all those types of things. Because again, when you miss that target, then the customer's going to call. There's loss. Somebody's got to reschedule it or, whatever has to happen in the system. And certainly aren't going to get any referrals. And that's one of the biggest problems with cable companies anyways. They don't get referrals because they don't deliver a great service. And so at 9 o'clock, the technician shows up, hits the target, and it's important to the customer. And I can tell you, having worked in this industry and other industries where time is important, arriving at a particular time negotiated with the customer and doing that is one of the things that is important to them. Now, the problem associated with these targets, and there are usually multiple ones in each service setting. So it might be, I want you to be here at 9, but I also want the cable to be correct when you set it up. Oh, we didn't put the right channels in, or, we don't have the right parts. Those types of things all create economic loss in association with the industry. So knowing what's important is often covered up in a fog because we don't ask the right questions in service industry. Nobody's asking because it's all ingrained in our system. We just give them 8 and 12, 12 to 4 target, those types of things rather than right at 9 a.m. And that becomes problematic that we're not even asking these questions. And so the question is, why aren't we asking these questions? This is a lot of the executive education program I take executives through is so that they can come to the realization that there's things covering up why we're not asking these questions, which is usually something to do with how many I do as a frontline person in a contact center. I've got to take so many calls in a day, and therefore I'm trying to get off the call rather than ask a customer what's important, creating extra work for me and extra waste associated with what I do. So because we're not asking those types of questions, we don't know what's important. So finding out what's important to the customer, what are all those targets? And you can learn these things over time. You may not get them perfectly identified right at the very beginning. So you've got to be able to ask the right questions, identify a target, and instead of giving the goalpost traditional thinking like in manufacturing with upper and lower specification limits, that you're coming up with an optimal time that works for the technician, in the case of the cable company, and the customer. And that creates value, and you're going to get references, and people are going to be amazed that you can do such a thing. Well, that's what I wanted to cover in this episode. Please hit the subscribe button, and you will get other concepts I think will be helpful to you in becoming an effective executive. Hit the bell, and you'll be notified as I release other videos in this particular YouTube channel.